All right, thanks everyone for being here today. My name is Matt Nelson. I'm the chair of the Armor Seminar Series here. And first I want to begin by acknowledging that the Field Museum was built upon the traditional homelands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. And the museum recognizes and is grateful for the original peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse indigenous nations that reside here today. Before I introduce Lance, I also wanted, this is our last seminar of the year, and I wanted to briefly thank the seminar team. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and I want to thank Abigail Derby-Lewis, Stacy Drake, Jingmei O'Connor, and Sarah Ruan, who played key roles in kind of coordinating the speakers as they come through. I want to thank Amanda Dick, who does just a tremendous job facilitating all the logistics, bringing Zoom to everyone as well. And then the IT team, Tim, Aurelius, Kevin, Jason, they've all really helped us with the number of hiccups we've had along the way, and I'm very grateful to them. And finally to Mary Pat Hoffer for pushing these videos to YouTube. So originally Stacy Drake was going to introduce Lance, but unfortunately Stacy's not able to be here today, but she sent me her intro, and so I'm just going to go ahead and read that here. Stacy says, "My task today is to introduce a man who surely needs no introduction around these parts. It's daunting to try to provide a small highlight of Dr. Lance Grande's accolades, but here's hoping I do some justice. Dr. Grande himself is an institution at the Field Museum, now curator emeritus. Congratulations on your retirement." He started his career at the museum in 1983 as a curator of fossil fishes. Over the years, Lance served in various leadership positions at the field, along with serving as associate professor at UIC, lecturer at UChicago, and a research associate at the AMNH in New York. His work in evolutionary and systematic biology, particularly through research conducted at the Green River Formation, has earned him various research grants and awards, produced over 100 scientific articles and publications, and led to the naming of 68 species and other new taxa. To top it off, he also has 3 fossils named in his honor. Lance has also written various books that widen his scope beyond fossil fish, including Gems and Gemstones, Curators, which illustrates the fascinating history of curation at the Field Museum, and his most recent accomplishment and topic of today's presentation, The Evolution of Religions, a history of related traditions. It goes without saying that Lance has made an incredible contribution to an impact on various fields of research and education, as well as the Field Museum itself. And I'm greatly looking forward to hearing more about his newest project. Please give a warm welcome to our own Dr. Lance Grande.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, I've been a curator at the museum here for over 40 years. And one of the things I've always loved about working at a major museum is the opportunity to do interdisciplinary research. My PhD, like Olivier Rebel's, is in biology, but we were both hired by a geology department. Many zoologists and botanists here combine their morphological work with environmentalism. In anthropology, Gary Feynman works with the zoology department's DNA lab. And Philip Heck works with paleontologists around the world on fossil meteorites. So just a few examples of the collaborative programs here. Such interdisciplinary work often leads to original, far-reaching insight about the world that we live in. Interdisciplinary work is ideal for an institution like the Field Museum. If we worked at a university, we might have to trek clear across campus to visit colleagues, collections, and facilities of other departments. Here, we're all in the same building, listening to each other's seminars, and sometimes even collaborating with each other's research projects. In the latter years of my career, I've tried to push the envelope of my interdisciplinary research into new interdisciplinary directions in order to reach people outside of my academic comfort zone. This brings me to the subject of my talk today, which is in conjunction with my newest book. Over the last 4 years, I've attempted to bring my experience in evolutionary theory and philosophy into the social sciences for the study of cultural history. Years ago, I became fascinated with how many social scientists rejected not only evolutionism, but comparativism as well. Here we see the famous University of Chicago Divinity School professor, J.C. Smith, quoted as saying, "Comparison is over." As a comparative systematist interested in deep history and evolution, I was intrigued. I noted a movement by linguists to bring comparativism and evolutionism back into the social sciences. And here we see a tree of Indo-European languages by one of these groups. I decided to try this with an aspect of human culture which has resisted comparativism and evolutionary philosophy for more than a century: religion. My context for objectivity is agnostic, no conscious preconception about which belief system, if any, is true to the exclusion of others. Several years of focused research on this subject resulted in a 688-page book being published by Columbia University Press. And today I'll present a very brief synopsis of it. Religions comprise one of the most complex socially ingrained aspects of human culture. Broader understanding of their historical interrelationships may be critical for the future survival of our species. This will be controversial within the social sciences and within some conservative religious groups. But in today's world of over 8 billion people, there's too much religiously enhanced conflict hindering us from collectively addressing major global challenges. So there are 3 parts to my presentation today. First, I'll discuss the concept of using comparativism and evolutionary theory in the study of human culture. Second, I'll show some resulting hypotheses of diversification among organized religion. And third, I'll discuss some general trends suggested by this study and what it may mean for the future of our species. So the first part, applying modern evolutionary theory and comparativism to the study of human culture. Comparativism is not a replacement for specialization. Instead, it is a necessary partner to it. Specialization plus comparativism gives us a broader perspective. In science, there must be a collaboration between specialists and comparativists. Here, I'm a systematic comparativist, relying on the work of many specialists from the social sciences. I agree with E.O. Wilson on where we are in the modern information age when he wrote, quote, "We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. The world henceforth will be run by synthesizers, people able to put together the right information at the right time, think critical about it, and make important choices wisely." I'll start with the traditional metaphorical tool used to express hypotheses of relationship, the tree. This tree simply says B and C are more closely related to each other than either is to A, period. It has no implication of superiority or inferiority. Modern evolutionary analysis uses unweighted shared characters to build hypothetical trees of relationship. For example, if we look at the matrix on the left, we have shared characters 1 through 4 for groups A, B, and C. And you'll note that B and C uniquely share characters 2, 3, and 4. Statistically, this indicates a hypothetical tree pattern, like the one in the middle, that can be explained by evolutionary process theory, as on the right, where B and C share a younger common ancestor Y than the group A, B, and C. Just as we apply these techniques to aspects of nature, such as animals, we can apply them to aspects of culture, such as religions. For example, if we look at 3 species of vertebrate animals, a robin, a sparrow, and a frog. The robin and the sparrow share many characters not also shared by the frog. These include feathers, certain wing structures, beaks, and numerous other characters. We can do the same thing with religions. For example, we look at Catholics and Protestants, they share many characteristics not also shared by Orthodox Judaism. This includes the New Testament veneration of a man named Jesus, 12 apostles, etc. again indicating that they have a younger common ancestor than all of Abrahamic religion. In some ways, the culture of evolution is easier with culture than with biology. Analysis of major biological diversification is almost exclusively reliant on character analysis, whereas analysis of cultural diversification also has contemporaneous written records of schisms or diversification and founders, ideological ancestors. So getting back to trees, Charles Darwin began using evolutionary trees to describe biological diversity by at least 1837. And here we see page 36 out of Darwin's 1837 Notebook B, where he's drawn a tree with D, B, and C being more closely related to each other than any of them is to A. Seems simple enough. So where did it all go wrong with the social sciences? The main problem was colonialist progressionism. 19th century progressive ladders, such as this one, invertebrates to fish, to reptiles, to mammals, to lower humans, to higher humans, and chauvinistic trees used to rationalize cultural superiority. Here on the right, we have Haeckel's 1876 tree of human pedigree that he interpreted as showing cultural superiority among certain races of humans. English anthropologist Herbert Spencer was another progressionist from the 19th century, founder of what became known as social Darwinism. His famous line was survival of the fittest. By the late 19th through early 20th centuries, some progressionists began inhumane attempts to supposedly, quote, improve human society, unquote, ranging from eugenics to genocide. Early backlash to this progressionist approach was the rejection of cultural evolutionism and comparativism by much or most of the social sciences. And some of these efforts were led by our very first curator here, Franz Boas. He was curator in 1893 and founder of the anti-comparativist school, historical particularism. However, in the biological sciences, by the mid-20th century, progressionism was rejected in favor of treating evolution simply as diversification over time. Rather than searching for ladders of progress, evolutionary biology became a search for historical relationships among putative groups. This transition still remains to be fully appreciated within much of the social sciences. Some social scientists also claim that culture is too complex to understand in evolutionary terms. Well, while culture is complex, it's no more complex than nature, and we can take steps to simplify historical studies of it. The first step has to do with focus. Anthropologist Gary Feynman once wrote, aspects of culture must be decoupled to decipher evolutionary history. For cultural history, just as for natural history, we need to focus on one aspect at a time. And here we can see various aspects of cultural history alongside of various aspects of natural history. For my cultural study, the focus was religion. So we come to the second part of my presentation to define religion and organized religion and show a few hypothetical trees of its historical diversification. Religion is a complex tree with many interconnected kinds or traditions. The first basic question is, how do we define it? There are many different ways in which historians have tried to define religion. Some include only traditions of deity worship, while others include all supernatural belief systems. I use the latter, less biased definition here. Another basic question is, what constitutes a kind of religion? Kinds in the social sciences are often called comparons, while kinds in the biological sciences are called taxa. Both types of kinds are simply hypothetical group samples of diversity that are still questioned and debated today. Here, for example, we have two recent books, Freeberger's 2021 book on cultural comparons and Mischler's 2021 book on biological taxa entitled What, If Anything, Are Species? Religion is an aspect of particular interest because of its immense impact on the cultural history of our species. Early in human history, religion promoted social cohesion by enhancing empathic, altruistic, and charitable behaviors. It also enhanced the early growth of literacy, music, and art. It also fueled the early development of higher education and most of medicine and healing prior to the 20th century. However, religion has also had a darker side. It's often been used to inflame deep intercultural chauvinism, conquest, and tribalistic conflict. Tribalistic conflict today is impeding our ability to collectively address global challenges. A broader, more pluralistic understanding of religions, as well as of other aspects of culture, could enhance our ability to deal with these challenges. Today, I present a simplified look at that diversity of traditions. I won't spend much time explaining specific trees that I'll show you today. My book will cover them in much greater detail. My focus is on organized religion, meaning religions that are codified or having rules and codes, and institutionalized, having established traditions. All the trees I will show you here today interconnect with each other at one level or another. Prior to 9000 BCE, organized religion began to diversify along two major branches: Eastern organized religion and Western organized religion. I'll begin with the Eastern branch in Asian cyclicism. Asian cyclicism has many major branches with hundreds, perhaps thousands of sub-branches. Its earliest records are from India. Here we see an 11,000-year-old artifact from the Baghar 1 site in India, thought to represent early Asian cyclicism. Some general characters of this group are: one, seeing time as cyclic rather than linear, with samsara, reincarnation, transmigration, yin-yang, kalak chakra, or other cycles of existence. Two, employing mind-body meditative physical practices such as mantras, yoga, zazen, tai chi, simrang, or qigong. And three, emphasizing orthopraxy, which means correct ethical conduct, rather than orthodoxy, which means adherence to scriptural dogmatic practice. Early in its history, Asian cyclicism diverged between Taoic religion in the Far East and the earlier Dharmic religion beginning in India. The largest branch of Dharmic religion is Hinduism, which includes 60% of all Asian cyclicism. Here we see an artifact of the Hindu deity Pashupati from the 24th century BCE. Its greatest expansion came under the Gupta Empire in the 4th to 6th century CE. Hinduism had already started to diversify by at least the 17th century BCE. And this tree here was made based mostly on data from Srinivasan. Buddhism is another branch of Dharmic religion, which today includes approximately 37% of all Asian cyclicism. Its early expansion was facilitated by the Indian emperor Ashoka the Great in the 3rd century BCE. Here we see a statue of Siddhartha Gautama, founder of Buddhism from the 5th century BCE, also known as the Buddha. By the end of the 1st century BCE, Buddhism had diversified extensively. And here we see a tree reconstructed mostly based on data from Boswell and Lopez. Jainism is another branch of Dharmic religion. It's a sister group to Buddhism, but it includes only 0.4% of Asian cyclicism. It's probably because it never had much imperial support through history. Here we see a statue of Mahavir, supreme preacher of Jainism from the 6th century BCE. Jainism was never as large as Buddhism, but it's similarly diversified into numerous sub-branches. And again, here we see a tree reconstructed based on data from Flugel. Sikhism, another branch of Dharmic religion. It's a relatively recent branch, approximately 15th century CE, containing less than 1% of Asian psychicism. It has 8 major sub-branches, mostly in India. And here we see a 19th century portrait of Guru Nanak, founder of Sikhism. Taoic religion is a non-dharmic branch of Asian cyclicism. It developed in Southeast Asia, forming Taoism and Confucianism in China and Shintoism in Japan. The deities of Shintoism are referred to as kami, and they enhanced imperial power. Here we see a portrait of Emperor Jimmu, the figurative godly ancestor to all succeeding emperors. In Japan, all emperors were treated as the godlike descendants of Shinto kami until the end of World War II. This generated fierce loyalty to the emperor during that war, such as the kamikazes. Shortly after Japan's surrender in 1945, the emperor signed the Humanity Declaration, admitting that he was not a deity. And here we have a picture of Emperor Hirohito, who signed that document. The numerous sub-branches of Taoic religion collectively make up 2% of all Asian cyclicism. And here we have a tree of Taoic religions based on various sources. So now getting back to the beginnings of organized religion. The sister group to Eastern organized religion and Asian cyclicism is Western organized religion, beginning with Old World hard polytheism. Old World hard polytheism developed before 9000 BCE in the Old World, later spreading to the Americas, first through Siberia. Hard polytheism is the belief in many independent deities. Each branch of it had its own pantheons or group of gods, and there were hundreds, perhaps thousands of different branches. Here, for example, we see Ninurta from the Mesopotamian pantheon, Osiris and Isis from the Egyptian pantheon, Cernunnos from the Celtic pantheon, Thor from the Old Norse pantheon, and Zeus from the Greek pantheon. Many pharaohs, emperors, and kings claimed to be part of the pantheon themselves in order to enhance their power and influence. And here we see, for example, Ramses II, Egyptian pharaoh from 1279 to 1213 BCE, and Octavian Augustus, Roman emperor, 27 BC to 14 CE. Both of them claimed to be gods and members of the pantheons, which greatly enhanced their power. Early polytheistic beliefs spread from the Old World to the New World for the Americas, along with the first humans to arrive there more than 20,000 years ago. Here we see some fossil human footprints from New Mexico, 21,000 years old. Between 30,000 and 11,000 years ago, the Old World was connected to the New World by a land bridge called Beringia, allowing human migration. This is a vast connection, as you can see in the upper map, between Siberia and the Alaskan region. This was cut off 11,000 years ago when rising sea levels permanently submerged Beringia under the Bering Strait, like it still is today. You can see in the bottom map here. Once the Beringian land bridge was gone, polytheism in the New World evolved independently from that in the Old World for thousands of years, something that biologists referred to as allopatry. And here we have one example of a shared character between Siberian polytheism and New World polytheism, a totem pole. New World polytheism flourished and diversified over the millennium until the late 15th century CE. But after 1492, it was rapidly overtaken by Western Christian conquest from Europe. It's estimated that approximately 90% of indigenous American population was wiped out during the first few centuries of the Spanish conquest. During that same period, over 1 million Spaniards colonized the America, referring to it as New Spain. Similarly, in the Northeast, European colonists renamed the land as New England or New France. Colonists referred to the indigenous American people as Indians. Eventually, even records of many indigenous New World religions, especially in North America, were lost or unrecognizably altered by Spanish conquistadors, Christian chroniclers, and the later indoctrinating residential schools. Here, for example, is an early painting, Cortez, and his 1521 defeat of the Aztec Empire for Catholic Spain. And on the right, we have a photograph from 1890 of a residential school in Quebec, which was for the assimilation of Inuit children in the Anglo-American Christian culture. So going back to early Western organized religion, the sister group to old world hard polytheism is linear monotheism. And this developed in the Middle East by the 14th century BCE with the reductions of the pantheon to a single god. The god of linear monotheism went by many different names, but he was never really female. He was Aten of Atonism, Ahura Mazda of Zoroastrianism, or El, Yahweh, Jehovah, Monad, or Allah of Abrahamic monotheism. Some general characters of linear monotheism are: one, having a linear rather than a cyclic view, one birth, one life, one death, an eternal afterlife. Two, having a strongly dualistic cosmology, good versus evil, light versus dark, heaven versus hell. Or three, being actively proselytic, historically with forceful conversion efforts and persecution of unconverted rival traditions at many points through history. The largest branch of linear monotheism is Abrahamic monotheism, which originated in the 6th century BCE, beginning with Second Temple Judaism and Smartism. Its followers share the belief in only one God and a series of prophets that included Noah, Abraham, and Moses. It includes 60% of all religious people today. Early Abrahamic monotheism developed sacred scripture called the Tanakh during the 6th century BCE. The Tanakh not only served as the Hebrew Bible, it later influenced the development of the Gospel of 12 for Ebionism, the Old Testament for traditional Christianity, the codices for biblical demiurgism, and the Quran for Islam. These four branches comprise what I call Jesu venerationism. Jesu venerationism is a major branch of Abrahamic monotheism that developed in the 1st century CE. It formed around a man named Jesus, who was venerated at various levels, ranging from Jewish rabbi to prophet to divine aspect of God, depending on which sub-branch we're talking about. And here we see an early depiction of Jesus from 232 CE Syria. Originally not having the typical Caucasian Western features that you see in modern images. Jesu venerationism diversified into Ebionism, traditional Christianity, and biblical demiurgism during the 1st century CE, and into Islam during the 7th century CE. Ebionism was a short-lived movement that followed Jewish law and revered Jesus as a prophet. However, it saw him as a mere man with human parents. Ebionites were subsequently deemed as heretics by traditional Christianity and even by Pharisaic Judaism, and they were widely persecuted and largely driven to extinction by the 7th century. Traditional Christianity saw Jesus as Son of God. It became the largest branch of Jesu venerationism, thanks in part to its early symbiotic alliance with the Roman Empire. In 313 CE, the empire legalized Christianity. And in 380 CE, it outlawed hard polytheism, making Christianity the empire's state religion. And here we can see a map of the Roman Empire during the late 4th century CE, showing that it occupied much of the old world. By the 16th century, major schisms developed within Christianity, resulting in the Reformation, which formed the Protestantism and Anglicanism branch. Both were contentious splits from Roman Catholicism. Protestantism began in Germany in 1517 with Lutheranism and Martin Luther's 95 Theses rejecting the Roman Catholic Pope. Anglicanism, also known as Anglican Protestantism, began with King Henry VIII His 1534 Act of Supremacy declared himself as head of the English Christian Church rather than the Catholic Pope. Biblical demiurgism was another early branch of Jason venerationism. It formed in the 1st century CE. It eventually lost its early violent competition with traditional Christianity. Biblical demiurgists were binatarians, believing in a primal good God, the monad, and an evil creator spirit called the demiurge. They saw Jesus as a spiritual emanation of the monad. And here we have a painting with the biblical demiurgist version of Jesus on a portrait from the 14th century in China. Biblical demiurgists were increasingly persecuted by the inquisitors and crusaders of traditional Christianity. By the late 14th century, they were effectively driven to extinction. Islam is another branch of Jason venerationism. It developed in Arabia with its prophet Muhammad. And here we have a portrait, 16th century portrait of Muhammad riding the steed Buraq into heaven. You note the face is whited out. According to Islamic law, you cannot depict the face of Muhammad in art, sometimes with fatal consequences for doing so. Islam's followers revere 25 prophets from Adam to Jesus, ending with Muhammad. Here we can see a chart of the 25 consecutive prophets of Islam according to the Quran, beginning with Adam, first prophet at the bottom, going to the penultimate prophet, Jesus, and finally ending up with Muhammad. Islam is the second largest religion today, just behind traditional Christianity. Its rate of increase today is also greater than that of traditional Christianity. The early success of Islam was enhanced by collaboration with large Muslim caliphates of the 7th and 8th centuries. And here we see a map of the expansion of the Islamic caliphates from 632 to 750 CE. And we can see, much like the Roman Empire earlier, the Islamic caliphates occupied much of the old world during this period. So, organized religions in summary. As mentioned earlier, all trees in the study can be interconnected into a single tree. The names in blue on this tree were all expanded into trees of their own in previous slides. Religion is one of the most ingrained and widespread aspects of human culture. Over 10,000 different sub-branches of organized religion are recognized today, most of which are sub-branches of those that I showed you earlier. Only about 2% of people in 2010 self-identified as atheists, according to the Pew Research Center. Major beliefs to which people self-identified in 2010 by one of the largest studies of Pew Research Center had traditional Christianity with 32.8%, Islam with 22.5%, Asian cyclicism, mostly Buddhism and Hinduism, with 22.4%, traditional Judaism, 0.2%, other religions not differentiated in my study because they're not well defined, 10.3%, agnosticism, 9.8%, and atheism, like I said before, 2%. This brings us to the third and final part of my presentation, to show a few trends apparent from the study and comment on their relevance to the future of our species. Based on my study, I can make 4 general observations and end with a recommendation. The first general observation, most or all organized religions are historically interrelated at one ideological level or another. Detailed hypotheses of their interrelationships can be unambiguously illustrated with trees, like the ones I've shown today. A second general observation, the largest major branches of organized religion today were historically intertwined with major political powers, a form of cultural symbiosis. Traditional Christianity with the Roman Empire, Islam with the medieval caliphates, Hinduism with the Gupta Empire, and Buddhism with the Mauryan Empire. The largest major organized religion in each country today is shown on this map. The country's Christian dominance, blue. The orange is Islam. Dark and light green are Hinduism and Buddhism. The third general observation: the authority of women in organized religion historically declined with the rise of male-dominated pantheons, empires, clergies, and caliphates. At one time, goddesses were the head of pantheons, or mother goddesses were revered above all others. But as civilization gradually morphed into male-dominated bodies, the female deities faded from the pantheons, and eventually we got to monotheism, which basically is clearly male-dominated. The fourth general observation: religions played a role in our species' early ability to adapt to its social and physical environment. As noted by Emil Durkheim, one of the architects of modern social science, in his book, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. The tribalistic aspect of religion was originally a competitive advantage for early humans when there were only a couple 100 million people on the planet. Communal societies that developed agriculture, commerce, educational facilities, and armies outcompeted less communitarian groups. However, the social and physical environment of the human species has significantly changed in today's interconnected, densely crowded, and technologically advanced world. Chauvinistic intercultural tribalism has increasingly become a maladaptive trait. The human population is over 8 billion people today, much of which is in long-standing intercultural conflict, often enhanced by religious differences. Hindu versus Buddhist, Jew versus Muslim, Muslim versus Christian, Protestant versus Catholic, Hindu versus Muslim, Sunni versus Shia, Russian Christianity versus Ukrainian Orthodox Christianity, religious versus atheist, and on and on. Ruling powers and subversive organizations still use such compassionate conflict to demonize cultural opponents, enhance their power, and help justify targeted violence. Increasingly, these conflicts are technologically escalated by hyperpartisan media, strategically designed to incite people's tribalistic impulses. Tribalistic conflict now interferes with our ability to collectively solve global challenges, such as climate change, pollution, population growth, pandemics, armed conflict, and devastating regional poverty. We as a species need to better adapt to our increasingly challenged social environment, or we risk expediting our own extinction. Broader understanding and tolerance of cultural diversity is a critical step for this, because cultural diversification over time is an inevitable, never-ending part of human existence. I'll simply end here with a quote from the late 20th century French environmentalist and social evolutionist René Dubos. Human diversity makes tolerance more than a virtue. It makes it a requirement for survival. And for a much more complex look at this, I hope you'll see my book, available by January 2024. And thank you all for listening.
You have time for questions?
Thanks, Lance. That's really interesting. I noticed you present the entire history of world religions as the process of bifurcation or multifurcation, but are there examples of hybridization or gene flow? Syncretism, I think, was a word I remember hearing.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of instances that are attributed to hybridization, but it's questionable whether that's a true hybridization or whether it's two different branches, each adopting characteristics of the other. And those are things that have yet to be fleshed out in detail. Because this is a new way of looking at these things culturally, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that regard. I mean, all I'm doing is setting out a template here because it's a basic shift in the way a lot of people look at these things. And what I'm hoping is that the patterns that I show will be tested in the future by specialists in all these different areas, but because it's really going to take the work of the specialists to ferret out the details. Because as I say, there's more than 10,000 religions recognized today, and there are probably many times that have gone extinct over the last 12,000 years.
Lance, that was very provocative and interesting, so thank you. There's been a lot of thought given to the rise of the Abrahamic religions in the 6th century BCE, but it seems to me that what you hypothesize with the rise of the linear monotheism about 1400 BCE is actually a more momentous kind of development. And I wonder if you have any information or thoughts about what were some of the historical factors that played into that emergence or split.
Yeah, I think it was, again, largely influence of imperial power, because, of course, if you instill the idea of a single power in a religion, it kind of mirrors what, say, imperial power would want to enforce too. That there was a single political power, i.e., the emperor or whoever it is. Also, I'll also say, although monotheism, at least in the groups that I looked at, began with Atonism. Atonism failed. I mean, it went away. And basically, as soon as the emperor that promoted it died, the other powers reinstituted the polytheistic belief systems that had occurred previously and deemed him as being a heretic. It wasn't until Zoroastrianism came along that monotheism stuck. And then that eventually influenced the rise of Abrahamic religion too. I mean, there are some people that theorize that Abraham himself might have been a Zoroastrian priest of some sort. So these things all do connect. The difficult thing is, because it's such a sensitive topic, most religions want to focus on their distinctiveness and not their relationships to others. And that's kind of the fundamental thing that has to kind of change if we want to learn more about these relationships, I think.
First of all, that was an amazing talk. I want to share with like 5 other people who can make it. And on that note, I have a very long question. I hope you have some interesting thoughts on it.
Okay.
So sometimes my friends ask, what would happen if all religion went away? And I tell them, you don't know, because it's like taking away an apex predator. This is so ingrained in society. We don't know what's going to happen if you take it all away. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It'll never happen.
It'll never happen?
No, I mean, it's such an ingrained aspect historically in human culture that, again, even today, there's only 2% of the population that claims to be atheist. So if that is the way things are still going, we better learn how to deal with the diversity of it rather than just imagining it's somehow all going to disappear, because that's just hiding from the challenges that actually are still ahead of us.
Do you think it's just so ingrained there's no way to really remove it? Like people like
Remove religion?
Yeah.
I can't see how that would be possible. I mean, again, people are always going to have supernatural beliefs. I mean, if that could change, there would be more than 2% of the population of the world today who would be atheists.
Okay. Well, my friends are going to hear your answer, so thank you.
You bet.
Okay.
So I think you already started to answer this question in a previous question, but so you attributed like the success in terms of number of people following a religion or not to the connection to imperial powers, right? So like so at first it was it would seem to me that there is nothing intrinsic about certain traits of the religions that are related to how far they spread or how successful they are in the competition in the religion space. If we could talk in those terms, or maybe not. Maybe there is. Did you identify any relationship between traits of religions and kind of their power to spread and to stick for a longer time? Just much like we do in biology with the.
So let me see if I understand what your question is.
Yeah.
Are you questioning, are you asking, is there something independent of imperial symbiosis that makes one religion more successful than another?
Yeah.
Wow. That's really difficult to answer. I mean, in some instances, sure. I mean, there were some religions that were clearly self-destructive, so they took themselves out of the equation eventually. There were some small sects that basically committed mass suicide. Okay, well, that's not the path to a dominating religion. But I think you can't underestimate the power of the symbiotic connection between imperial power and religion, because both sides really gain something significant from such a connection. Obviously, the imperial power can have another influence over a population to go in a certain direction. And a religion can benefit simply by having an imperial pressure towards one belief system or another. So again, it's a truly symbiotic relationship. And that is going to be controversial too, of course, because it's such a sensitive topic. And I think that's one of the reasons why not many people approach it in this way. I mean, I can give you an anecdotal example of this. That sensitivity, that is. I published my last 3 trade books with University of Chicago Press. And 3 years ago, when I took the outline and title of this to them, they said that they wouldn't be able to touch it because any book they did that had the word religion on the cover had to be signed off on by the Divinity School. And the Divinity School would never go for a book on the evolution of religion. So I mean, these connections of things, religious with non-religious, are powerful and impactful. And it's going to be a socially complicated thing to work through if we're going to make any progress here. Hey, John.
Lance, thanks. So one of the things I take away very clearly from this is the fairly explicit sexism across all these religions. So what do you think is the future of that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It makes sense that, early on, you had these Venus sculptures that I know they're between 37,000 and 20,000 years ago that were very common. And they were basically sculptures of women emphasizing the reproductive parts. And you had very few sculptures of male images during that period. And it's been speculated by many that early on, it was women who were deified and who were basically worshipped because of how important motherhood was to the survival of a clan. But as political and organizational structure changed with time, you had the development of male emperors, of male-dominated armies, and gradually, as that happened, you had the phasing out of goddesses and the pantheons, and the chief gods were always male after a while, and eventually you went to monotheism. Well, it was only that chief god that was left, and so it was kind of, seems to be a gradual thing that has changed. Now, I don't know if that is going to go back in the other direction, but if you look around today at what you have in any major religion, I mean, you know, look at, say, Catholicism. Well, who leads that? You've got always a male pope. Priests are always male. You know, or let's look at Islam. I mean, you know, that the male dominance there is very clear. So yeah, I think this has kind of gone in that direction, and I don't know what the answer is about seeing any change there.
Thank you for your presentation. My question, well, I was wondering about your classification of New World polytheism and to what extent your analysis relies on accounts by practitioners of other religions, specifically Catholicism.
The last part of your question, I didn't quite hear.
Oh, sorry. To what extent does your classification of New World polytheism rely on accounts or analysis by practitioners of other religions? I think most generally Catholicism.
Well, the tree of New World hard polytheism, that's basically, it's complex because it's based on many different sources, and some of those sources, unfortunately, are from people who are actually trying to destroy those belief systems. I mean, of course, again, when we had the colonization of the New World, we had a lot of impact from the Christian powers that accompanied that, and part of their mission was to convert the masses there. And so even the historical records that were made were often done by people with a very biased kind of perception. And so it's hard to know what to take from that. But again, those kind of difficulties are not any different than biologists face, because what we're working with fossils, and you know, what are those? Well, you know, things that are preserved in rocks, and sometimes we don't even know what is the head end and what is the tail end. So it's like all studies of deep history. The farther back you go, the more challenges there are in doing it. And all we can do is just keep doing the best we can and being unambiguous about what we find, so that others can come in and revise, test, falsify, and improve whatever it is we're doing. So what I'm hoping again is, if I'm setting out a template here, that specialists will then attack some of these branches and say, okay, well, I like this part, I don't like this part. This is what it should be. And that's how science works.
Hello. Hi, thank you for your talk. I was curious about, did you consider in your research the evolution of religious behaviors and the functional mechanisms used by religious organizations to—
What kind of behaviors?
I'm thinking of the mechanisms used by religious institutions to support pro-social behaviors. So you have the emergence of certain figureheads, you have ritual holidays, ritualized behaviors and mechanisms like that. And I was curious, how did you consider those in your research on the evolution of religions?
Well, I considered all characteristics that I could, because again, I'm not putting values on these characters. I'm simply looking at whether or not they're shared with some of the groups, and then simply trying to make subgroups based on, you know, how they're uniquely defined by sets of characters. So yeah, I mean, I'm not making value judgments here. I'm just trying to look for patterns that show these patterns of relationship, which again, we can theorize have historical basis. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think so. I was kind of thinking about like evolutionary pressures in our social lives and how that informed the establishment of certain religious behaviors.
Well, you're talking about pressures. Again, that's not something that I'm investigating here. I'm looking for relationships. However, those relationships develop, that's something else. And somebody else can look at that. I think first we have to identify where those relationships are. And that's something we have relatively little information on so far. And Margaret?
Lance, very interesting talk. It struck me in looking at the little list of continuing binary oppositions among religious groups that I'm not sure I saw the very end of the list or read it, but it seemed as though the conflicts were largely between groups within a major lineage.
Say that again?
Well, several of those, for instance, were conflicts between two of the Abrahamic religions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what might be behind that. Maybe partly you mentioned the idea of the different religions wanting to make themselves distinctive. And it could be something like that, but I'm curious whether you think there might be anything else to that.
Well, there again, the conflicts often develop by a division where there are two groups and each thinks that it is the correct group and that the other group needs to be corrected. And you know, the degree to which that happens can range from simple literature to you know, guns. And so it's I'm not sure what the complete answer to that is, to be honest. I mean, you know, it's just, there are many different reasons for conflict. And that's something that has to be examined separately from, first of all, identifying what the groups are. I mean, in a lot of instances, we don't know what the kinds are because partly there are different interpretations about how many things are included in a certain kind, and or how one kind predates another, or I mean, it's extremely complicated to ferret out everything but the most empirical part of that. But as scientists, we have to try and figure out the empirical parts.
Yeah. It seems to me like one of the big differences between like cultural evolution and biological evolution is that cultural evolution, information can be inherited from extinct lineages. Like, so what do you think about how like attempts to revitalize religions that are no longer practiced, like neo-paganism, for instance?
Well, inheritance is necessary for any tree of evolution. I mean, if it's not ideological inheritance, it's genetic. And so, again, I don't see much difference there in terms of empirical analysis.
Well, I'm wondering like how you fit in like revitalization attempts of a religion that is extinct.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is neo-paganism, is that like revival of a extinct branch? Is that a lineage of some modern branches has convergently evolved with the extinct one? How do you classify that?
See, neo-paganism is one of those terms which is, I mean, what biologists often refer to as wastebasket groups, because it's not necessarily a group, maybe several different groups that seem to fall into a category. And so they will call it neo-paganism. But when the specialists start to work on this, they may in fact find that you have several different independent branches here that still need to be ferreted out. As I said before, this is the most general of templates right now. And what's necessary is for the specialists to start to look at some of these groups and, tear some of these groups apart into components and figure out how we can even compare these things in a consistent way. I mean, biologists have been doing this for well over a century, and that this is something that's kind of going to have to start with certain aspects of culture, I think. And so there's a long way to go.
All right, well, we're at about 1 right now. I know there's a lot more questions here and there's some online. Perhaps they can chat with you afterwards or shoot you an email, but I want to say thanks very much again for your presentation and for sharing your work with us. This is really interesting and fascinating, thought-provoking. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for coming, Gary.